Chapter 24. Vacation's End. Angelique woke up the next morning with thoughts of Karnik still lingering. The sheer improbability of their paths crossing again, particularly with Karnik training so near their childhood home, seemed almost unfathomable. Her mind wrestled with the serendipity, playing the scenario on repeat. But her reflections were interrupted when her mother walked into the room. The news she brought jolted Angelique in a way she hadn't felt since before her latest deployment. With saddened features, her mother stared down at Angelique and just let it out, like ripping off a band-aid. "We're out of coffee, sweetie." 3 words Angelique never wanted to hear in the mornings were, "out of coffee." She reached back with both arms and jerked the pillow from under her head. And as she thought about letting out an overly exaggerated moan, Angelique had an epiphany. Just down the road was an army infantry unit. "I know they have coffee," she thought. Angelique slithered out of her bed, much like a snake on a chilly spring morning. The more she thought about the coffee and running into Karnik once again, the faster she put on her sweats. Army coffee always tasted bad, but since she hadn't started drinking coffee until her first year in the army, it tasted great to her. Had it not been for the army, she may never have started drinking it, but in the military, if you wanted a break from working or training, you either smoked or drank coffee. Since Angelique didn't want to destroy her lungs from smoking, she chose coffee. At first, she had just held it, but it wasn't long before the little sips she took for show became bigger, and then she was hooked. Once dressed, Angelique stepped out of the back door of the house, stretched, and took deep breaths of the fresh Ozark morning air. After a few stretches to loosen up her muscles and joints, she was off. Keeping at a slow jog rather than her usual fast-paced run, Angelique took in the sights. Running down an old gravel road was something she missed greatly. The closest she had been to the feeling was running through a park, but it wasn't even close to the same experience. As she ran, she checked her pocket to make sure that she had grabbed her identification from Homeland Security, just in case they tried throwing obstacles between her and the coffee. After a mile and a half, Angelique knew from years of living on the road that she was coming to the end. With every step, she waited to see men training, or at least having breakfast. Then again, if they are training, they may be staying out of sight, she thought, as she looked even harder while jogging. Her memory of where the road ended was spot on. She could see the hillside of Raven Bluff and hear the creek in the distance. She knew that this was the end of the road because the county had stopped repairing the concert slab through the creek years ago. It had washed out too many times. Halting to assess any traces of the soldiers' activities, Angelique's intrigue grew. From her survey, it seemed evident they had vacated the vicinity. Any lingering desire for coffee was swiftly replaced by the speculation that this might be the very unit that was believed to have reached Arkansas. Instinctively, she reached for her cell phone, realizing too late she'd left it on her nightstand. Whirling around, she sprinted back the way she came, faster than before. There were calls to make. For the first time in what felt like forever, Angelique sensed a renewed purpose in her work. As she ran, one thought kept coming to her. How the hell had Carl become part of this? Trying to work the thoughts out, she ran and ran. Other than how Carl became wrapped up in this, she tried to figure out just how the hell they had ended up here. Then, like 2 powerful magnets slapping together, it came to her. Carl Eugene Karnik. He brought them here to stay on familiar ground, but where are they now? Angelique looked over to her right and was amazed at how run down the house Carl once lived in had become. Angelique was deep in her thoughts when the sound of voices pulled her back to the here and now, and she slowed to almost full stop. Listening for the voices once again, she could tell one was her father's. "I don't know where she is," he was saying emphatically. Angelique had now completely stopped. Then she heard another very familiar voice. "Jonathan, we know she is here, and if you tell us, things will go much smoother. Now, where is Angelique?" "That conniving snake," Angelique muttered, trying to discern Jonathan's intentions at her parents' home. From her vantage point at the hill's base, she spotted multiple black SUVs, amplifying her suspicions. A gut feeling told her something was amiss. Acting on instinct, she veered off the gravel path, stealthily navigating through tall grasses and between trees to approach the rear of her parents' house. Drawing closer, the dialogue between Jonathan and her parents became increasingly audible. The words she discerned sent her heart hammering against her chest, like a caged bird desperate for escape. "Put them in the car. We'll take them with us. They will tell us what we want to know," Jonathan instructed one of the many other Homeland Security officers. After hearing Jonathan's orders to the men holding her parents, Angelique wanted nothing more than to run over and demand an explanation, but the number of personnel they had brought told her it was not a social call. Moving quickly and swiftly through the woods, she could see her parents being placed in the back of the SUV. Her first thought about something other than her parents was of her .45s. Both were lying on her nightstand just beside her bed. Using the oak tree as a shield, Angelique strategized swiftly. The familiar sounds of the old house were like a guide, each creak and squeak informing her of the intruder's movements. The familiarity of the old home gave her a distinct advantage, having grown up hearing those same sounds. On her approach, she picked up a fallen limb from the tree. The scraping of the branch against the house would make a clever ruse. It was the sound of something unusual, something worth investigating. She heard the creaking grow closer, and could almost visualize the exact path the agent was taking. As the screen door groaned open, Angelique coiled herself ready to spring. Her entire body was tensed and focused, the culmination of her training and instinct guiding her every move. The agent, unaware of the ambush awaiting him, was about to meet Rocktown's finest in her element. "We're moving out," a voice called from the front of the house, and her prey stopped in his tracks, turned, and followed his orders. Angelique, on the other hand, couldn't tell if she was relieved or disappointed in the sudden turn of events. As the agent moved back to the front of the house, she used the stick to her advantage once more. The back door was almost fully opened by the agent when Angelique heard the call. Thinking quickly, she pushed the stick wedged securely in the door jamb. It would temporarily jam the door, making a fast exit or entrance from the back challenging. The element of surprise was now even more on her side. Emerging quietly from around the tree, Angelique crouched low, listening intently for the agent's footsteps. They grew fainter as he approached the front of the house, indicating he had shifted his attention. With the back door effectively blocked, she had created a brief window of opportunity to reassess her situation or prepare another surprise. Angelique knew the layout of her childhood home like the back of her hand, and she was confident in her ability to navigate through it undetected in the dim early morning light. Now she needed to decide on her next move, whether to confront the invaders or find a more covert way to gain the upper hand. She listened for the squeaks and boots hitting the wood floor, and wondered how far the agent would get before realizing the door didn't close. She didn't have to wait long, for there were no squeaks or boots connecting with wood. The agent wasn't moving. Angelique once again positioned herself ready to strike. Then came the sound of boots. He was moving to the front of the house. Her body relaxed, and she listened to the sound, judged his position in the house, and waited for her moment to move. Angelique didn't waste time. Once the agent passed the bedroom that contained her pistols, she moved. Again, with the characteristics of a lioness, she moved ever so stealthily. Not one board squeaked, and not one foot touching the floor could be heard. Even the drawer that held her .45's caliber Colt 1911s, which always created a great deal of noise when opening, seemed to bow to her and remain silent. Angelique had no illusion about what was going to take place next. The men out front had her parents, and she had her .45s. She felt that was enough, but one thing stood in her way. The men out front were her agents, and the last thing she wanted was to get into a shooting match with fellow agents. She needed intel. At this point, even though she didn't want to, she had to let them take her parents. Angelique moved quickly to the front of the house in the hopes of gathering a little more information about what Jonathan was doing here with so many men. She opened the front door ever so slightly and pressed her ear up to the opening. The first words she heard were, "Taken the capital, sir." Angelique was greatly confused now. Jonathan's voice sounded like he was in disbelief as he spoke. "What do you mean they have taken the capital?" "Sir, the reports coming in say it was a 3-stage attack on the state capital of Jefferson City." By whom?" Jonathan asked, cutting off the agent giving the report. "It's believed to be the rogue unit thought to be in Arkansas, sir." The agent closed his notebook, signifying to his superior that he had given him all the information he had received. "Okay, let's load up and move out. Our information about the chief having a connection to the unit was spot on. She is probably there with them now, Jonathan said to the agent as they climbed into the SUV. Upon hearing the conversation, Angelique's jaw dropped, and an audible gasp came out. She slowly closed the door and started walking through the house while attempting to make sense of what she had just heard. Halfway through, Angelique stopped suddenly and said aloud, "Carl Eugene Karnik."